Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I am Juan Francisco Facchetti, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Paraguay here in Vienna. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, firstly, let me welcome you to today's event on the 15th anniversary of the entry into force of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, also known as ICSANT. For those who have traveled from outside Vienna to be here, I especially thank you for making efforts to join us here for this historic event co-hosted by UNODC, Canada, and the European Union. We will now hear a video message from Mrs. Ghada Wally, Under-Secretary General, Director General of the United Nations Office at Vienna, Executive Director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Mrs. Wally, you have the word.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address you at this high-level event to mark the 15th anniversary of the entry into force of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. This milestone is cause for celebration. Peaceful uses of nuclear technology in medicine, research, industry, and agriculture contribute to global health and prosperity. While leveraging this potential, countries must also keep nuclear and other radioactive material out of the hands of terrorists and other criminals. This convention is a key legal instrument for achieving this aim. UNODC helps member states become party to it and provides technical, operational, and legislative assistance on its implementation. We have assisted over 100 member states and trained thousands of criminal justice, law enforcement, and frontline officers on the implementation of the convention. I'm proud of our collective achievement. 15 years after its entry into force, the convention has 120 states parties. Our work in this area in recent years was made possible thanks to funding from the European Union and the Government of Canada. We work in close cooperation with institutions and experts from the UN system, including OCT, IAEA, and OLA, and beyond, as well as with civil society and academia. While great progress has been achieved, much remains to be done. I trust that today's event will stimulate discussion on strengthening the global nuclear security architecture and position us to better prepare for the future. I am convinced that by joining forces around our common legal framework, we can more effectively prevent and combat nuclear terrorism. Thank you for your participation and partnership, and I wish you fruitful discussions.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wally. I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Troy Lulanj-Nick, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Canada to the United Nations in Vienna. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. Welcome. I'm really honored to be here with you today as we celebrate and recognize the 15th anniversary of the entry into force of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. Really grateful to Ghada Wally and UNODC for all their diligent work in the implementation of the convention. Also grateful to the EU for working with us and supporting the convention now and up to this point. We're meeting amidst quite difficult circumstances with Russia's aggression in Ukraine and attacks on Ukraine's nuclear infrastructure. So it's a really difficult context. But I'm really gratified that we are here 15 years later after entry into force. I remember well the negotiations of the instrument, and it was gratifying to see that we could all come together and bring this convention as a part, an important component of our nuclear security architecture, and I think it has served us well since then. And at the same time, we had the amendment to the CPPNM, which further buttressed our nuclear security regime. And these legal instruments taken together are critical for us to facilitate the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and to keep us all safe. I would say if we look where we are now, 15 years on, it's a rather difficult environment. The world has changed, has grown. There are approximately 20 million nuclear substances that are flowing, radioactive materials that are flowing around the world globally, transported and used in a myriad of applications. So we're talking about industrial, medical, mining applications. And so the ubiquity of these materials compels us to be vigilant around the globe. And you may say, I'm a state without a nuclear reactor or a major nuclear program for nuclear energy, but you certainly have radioactive substances, Cat1, Cat2 substances in your country, and you have substances that will flow through that country. And so that is why it is critical that ICSANT remains a cornerstone of that nuclear security architecture. You couple with that the rise in international criminal activity, the sophistication of smuggling networks, the innovation and adaptation that criminal organizations are showing, and it militates towards a very complicated environment for us as we try to collectively confront these challenges. We also have new reactor builds and the SMR developments that we're on the precipice of really a paradigm shift in the industry as well. And so all of this taken together really underscores the need for collective action on nuclear security. I think the great value of ICSANT is that it provides us the legal basis for international cooperation on investigation, prosecution, extradition of those involved in nuclear terrorist acts. We have been working very diligently with UNODC, with the Parliamentarians for Global Action, first and foremost to get ratifications and signatures of ICSANT, and I'm really pleased that over the past couple of years we have a few new countries that have joined us. There's also the actual implementation of the convention, so looking at the national legislative basis, to give a national framework, a legal framework for the convention's implementation. And then there's the actual operationalization of the convention itself. So what does it mean? What raising the awareness and literacy among judges and lawyers, and Ghada talked a little bit in her message about all of the extensive training, capacity building, sessions that have been going on related to ICSANT implementation. And I was very pleased to participate just a couple of weeks ago here in Vienna at a mock trial that we held with a range of countries across the world to go through the machinations of what a process and a prosecution would mean under ICSANT. So I think that was very successful, and we're doing that throughout the world, and Canada's really honored to be a part of it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lulashnik, for your introductory remarks on the ICSANT. I would like to give the floor to, we will now hear a video message from Marjolein van Deelen, Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, European External Action Service.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate 15 years of ICSANT, a key international instrument that helps us mitigate the risks linked to nuclear proliferation by non-state actors. In times as these, when the rules-based international order is under tremendous pressure because of the gross violations of the UN Charter, our joint efforts towards nuclear security and multilateralism are needed more than ever. Over the past 20 years, the European Union has been actively working on measures to combat proliferation and to enhance global nuclear security. To achieve this goal, the EU promotes, in cooperation with the UN and other international organizations, the universalization, implementation and strengthening of the key multilateral treaties. We remain a steadfast supporter of ICSANT
and the many good projects implemented by UNODC and UNOCT, assisting states to join the Convention and effectively implement its provisions. Since 2018, the EU has contributed €5 million in project funding to help ICSANT grow, evolve, enhance and improve. Last year, through this project, the ICSANT website was launched, offering good practices and model legislation to interested states. The EU has also supported the release of a manual on fictional cases related to offences under this convention, as well as tailor-made e-learning modules and other training materials. We greatly appreciate the vast experience accumulated by UNODC, UNOCT and the IAEA in assisting states to prevent and counter acts of nuclear terrorism. Further synergies between relevant international organizations are crucial to facilitate international cooperation, technical assistance and capacity building. We are convinced that these efforts will greatly enhance our collective security by reducing the likelihood of nuclear and other radioactive material falling into wrong hands and being used for terrorist or other criminal purposes. My appreciation goes out in particular to UNODC for organizing today's high-level event, together with Canada and the European Union. I would like to invite all UN member states to join this important convention. By doing so, you will help progress with our common goal towards the universalization of ICSANT and strengthening the nuclear security architecture, its culture and practice across the globe. The EU hopes to see this community grow even further in the time to come. We count on your partnership in that. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Madeleine, for this presentation. That concludes our opening remarks from the event co-host. We will now hear a video message from Mr. Vladimir Voronkov, Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Office for Counterterrorism.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be part of this important event in what is the 15th year since the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism entered into force. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Canada, and the European Union for co-hosting this momentous event. I am confident that our common efforts can bring us closer to universalization. Since 2019, the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, through its United Nations Counterterrorist Center, has partnered with UNODC to jointly implement the project on promoting universalization and effective implementation of ICSANT, demonstrating our commitment to an all-of-UN approach to combat terrorism. I would also like to express my gratitude to the European Union as both donor and partner in this endeavor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Tajikistan ratified ICSANT in June 2022, thereby contributing to reinforcing the global nuclear security architecture. We are pleased that ICSANT project contributed to this ratification process, including through the organization of a national advocacy event with Tajikistan parliamentarians in February 2021 to raise awareness on the convention. That same month, Tajikistan reported to the International Atomic Energy Agency that during a special operation, 133 pieces of nuclear material were seized from persons who planned to sell the materials either within the country or to buyers in Afghanistan. This demonstrates that the development of robust regional cooperation, legal frameworks, and nuclear security detection capability within states and at borders are crucial to prevent, protect against, and respond to the malevolent use of radiological and nuclear materials. In October, Oman also ratified the convention, bringing the number of ICSAN state party to 120. However, we still need to continue working towards universalization and effective implementation of the convention. To this end, my office is providing capacity building assistance to the requesting member states in the area of combating nuclear terrorism. Support is provided through regional tabletop exercises and workshops focusing on building capacities to effectively prevent and respond to nuclear terrorism. These activities demonstrate the value for states to join the treaty and prevent and prohibit acts of nuclear terrorism. Through effective cooperation and partnerships, UNOCT's global program on preventing and responding to weapons of mass destruction and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terrorism aims to provide a collective response to the global challenge of nuclear terrorism. Let me conclude by thanking all member states' representatives for their participation in this special event, acknowledging the importance of this key legal instrument. We remain ready to support member states within the framework of the ICSAN project and beyond. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voronkov, for your remarks. Continuing this high-level remark section on the ICSAN, I would like to give the floor, and we will hear a video message from Rafael Mariano Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Thank you to Executive Director Gara Wali for opening this event to mark the 15th anniversary of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. I'm sorry my travel schedule does not allow me to be with you in person as I would have liked. Dear friends, terrorism and criminality threaten every continent every day. Radioactive and nuclear material cannot be allowed to fall into the hands of those intent on causing harm. As the world harnesses the peaceful uses of nuclear technology for the benefit of all, we must work together to reduce that threat. An act of nuclear terrorism perpetrated in one state would have consequences for all of us. ICSAN is an important part of the legal framework aimed at combating the threat of nuclear terrorism. Together with another key nuclear security instrument, the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material as amended, it helps deny safe haven and ensure justice. These instruments serve to harmonize approaches to preventing and responding to criminal acts and help to facilitate international cooperation. As we mark ICSAN's anniversary, I want to thank Ms. Wali and UNODC for promoting its universalization and effective implementation. UNODC and the IAEA both do important work assisting member states in strengthening and implementing their legal obligations, including by offering technical and legal assistance. And we stand ready to fulfill our role under ICSAN. In closing, let me assure you, the IAEA will continue these crucial endeavors so that in 15 years, when we celebrate the 30th anniversary of ICSAN, we can say that we've done everything in our power to reduce the threat of nuclear terrorism and criminality around the world.
Thank you, Mr. Grossi. We will now hear a video message from Mr. David Nanopoulos, Chief Treaty Section, UN Office of Legal Affairs.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism of 13 April 2005 is a key component of the framework of 19 international legal instruments to prevent terrorist acts that have been developed under the auspices of the United Nations and of the International Atomic Energy Agency since 1963. At the current session, in its latest resolution on measures to eliminate international terrorism, the General Assembly recalled, in particular, the adoption of the ICSANT and urged all states to consider, as a matter of priority, becoming party to it. Universal participation in this treaty is indeed fundamental for enhancing international cooperation between states in devising and adopting effective and practical measures for the prevention of acts of nuclear terrorism and for the prosecution and punishment of their perpetrators. The Secretary General of the United Nations has the privilege of being the depository of ICSANT. In practice, the treaty section of the United Nations Office of Legal Affairs carries out depository functions on his behalf. As depository, the Secretary General is the custodian of the original text of ICSANT. In addition, he is responsible for ensuring the proper executions of all treaty actions relating to the Convention. ICSANT is open to all states. Its current 120 parties are distributed among all UN regional groups, comprising in particular 31 Asia-Pacific states, 26 African states, 20 Eastern European states, 19 Latin American Caribbean states, and 23 states from the Western European and other states group. The Convention was open for signature until 31 December 2006 at UN headquarters and entered into force on 7 July 2007, an important milestone we are celebrating today. 115 states have signed the treaty, but signature alone is insufficient to join the treaty. In order to become a party, a signatory must express its consent to be bound by the Convention by ratification, acceptance, or approval. And of course, states can directly join the treaty by accession. This process provides states with the necessary time to seek approval for the Convention at the domestic level and enact any legislation necessary to implement it domestically prior to undertaking legal obligations under the Convention at the international level. Ratification at the international level should not be confused with ratification at the domestic level. Ratification at the national level alone is not sufficient to establish a state's intention to be legally bound by the Convention. The required action to join the treaty is the deposit of an instrument of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession with the Secretary General of the United Nations. It is imperative that the instrument be signed by one of three specified authorities, namely the head of state, the head of government, or the Minister for Foreign Affairs. In addition to certain formal requirements, the instrument must include an unambiguous expression of the intent of the government on behalf of the state to consider itself bound by the Convention and to undertake faithfully to observe and implement its provisions. An instrument of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession becomes effective only when it is deposited with the Secretary General at United Nations headquarters in New York. In practice, permanent missions will often deliver the original instrument directly at the treaty section of the Office of Legal Affairs. States wishing to make the deposit in a more formal setting can request that a deposit ceremony be organized by the treaty section. This will provide for a photo opportunity, contributing to the promotion of ICSANT. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Nanopoulos, for your remarks. That concludes the high-level remarks section of our event. We will now hear from Mrs. Maria Lorenzo Sobrado, He is head of the CBRN Terrorism Prevention Program in the Terrorism Prevention Branch of UNODC on the core provisions and benefits of adherence to ICSANT. Mrs. Sobrado, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Facchetti. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues. What a pleasure to be here 5 years after we celebrated the 10th anniversary event that UNODC co-hosted also in December, 5 years ago, with Canada. We grew bigger since, and now we are co-hosting both with Canada and with the European Union. And we grew bigger in many ways since we have been doing much more work in the past 5 years than we were doing in the past, thank you to the efforts of our donors and our team itself. The presentation from the Office of Legal Affairs gives me a good opportunity to announce that as of 3 October, we have been confirmed by the Office of Legal Affairs in New York on behalf of the Secretary General, who is the depositary of ICSANT, certain functions under Article 7.4 of the Convention, namely in relation with the designation of liaison points. So you will be hearing from us about that in the coming months. Now I would like to give you some highlights on the main obligations and main benefits of the Convention. So ICSANT is mainly a criminalization treaty. It requires states parties to establish as offenses in national law, inter alia, the intentional and unlawful possession of radioactive material, including nuclear material, with the intent to cause death or serious bodily injury or substantial damage to property or to the environment. It also requires a states party to criminalize the use or threat of use of radioactive material or a device with the intent to cause death or serious bodily injury or substantial damage to property or to the environment, or to compel a natural or legal person, an international organization, or a state to do or to refrain from doing an act. And please note that I say or, which means that the terrorist intent is not a conditio sine qua non for ICSANT to apply. This means that ICSANT goes beyond nuclear terrorism, and it covers also criminal acts, other criminal acts involving the intentional and unlawful use of nuclear or other radioactive material by non-state actors. And this is something that is quite important to note, because we tend to think that it has a narrow scope, but the scope is much broader. And as previous speakers said, actually another important feature of ICSANT is that it covers not only nuclear material, but also radioactive material. And as we know, there are radioactive sources all over the world for medical, agricultural, industrial, and other purposes. Another important feature of ICSANT is that it requires states to establish jurisdiction over those acts that it requires that the states criminalize. And this means that states would then have a tool to prosecute acts also outside their territory, and in this way defend, for instance, victims of an attack under ICSANT outside their territory. Now, I would like to move briefly to the benefits of joining ICSANT. Adherence to ICSANT strengthens national, regional, and global security. It also has a deterrent effect and reduces the risk of impunity of offenders by denying them safe havens. There are still 60 states that are not over 60 states that are not party to ICSANT, which means we still have 60 safe havens. ICSANT offers a common baseline and minimum standards for legal frameworks against nuclear terrorism. And when I say a common baseline, it means that this is the minimum that the international community agreed to in order to prevent and suppress acts, nuclear terrorism and other criminal acts involving nuclear or other radioactive material, but nothing prevents states from going beyond and criminalize, for instance, hoaxes. The Convention facilitates, as it was already mentioned, international cooperation in criminal matters by facilitating extradition, mutual legal assistance, and information exchange. Being party to and implementing ICSAN contributes to the state's compliance with relevant legally binding Security Council resolutions. For instance, Security Council Resolution 1373 and Security Council Resolution 1540 of 2004. ICSAN is complementary to other legal instruments against nuclear terrorism. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Grossi, was actually talking about the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment. ICSAN has a broader scope than these instruments, as it covers not only nuclear material, but also radioactive material. It applies to nuclear material and facilities used for or retained for both military and peaceful purposes, and it contains a much broader definition of nuclear facility. For instance, a truck transporting a radioactive source from the airport to a hospital is considered a nuclear facility under ICSAN, and this is something that the legislators need to take into account. With this, I gave you a few highlights on the importance of ICSAN. As it was mentioned, we have a website where you can find all the information on this convention, and I would like to finalize by thanking everyone who is here today, all those who travel, all the panelists, and very especially the team on CBRN, Francesca, Arten, and Martin, who have worked extremely long hours to make this event possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lorenzo Sobrado, for your presentation. We will now hear from Mrs. Francesca Andrian, Program Officer in the CBRN Terrorism Prevention Program of TPB of UNODC, on UNODC's key contribution to the universalization and effective implementation of ICSAN. Mrs. Adrian, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Facchetti. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good morning. I have the pleasure of providing you with an overview of UNODC's contribution and key accomplishments with regards to the universalization and effective implementation of ICSAN. Allow me to start my intervention by quoting our Executive Director, Ms. Ghada Waly. In her words, the risk of nuclear and other radioactive material falling into the wrong hands and being used for terrorist or other criminal purposes is one of the greatest challenges of our time. All states need to establish robust and sustainable legal frameworks to counter this threat. So the emphasis here is placed on the key role played by the legal framework to counter and prevent acts of radiological and nuclear terrorism. UNODC's core mandate is typically focused on criminal justice responses to terrorism. As Ms. Waly says, UNODC has been spearheading for almost 2 decades efforts to promote the universalization and effective implementation of the international legal instruments against terrorism, including ICSAN, and has provided tailor-made technical and legal assistance to UN member states in this regard. UNODC's mandate to counter radiological and nuclear terrorism stems from the UN General Assembly and has been reiterated through successive resolutions adopted by this organ. In its latest resolution adopted in this regard, the General Assembly recognized UNODC's specialized knowledge of the international legal framework for combating chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terrorism, and requested UNODC to continue providing assistance to its member states in preventing and countering these forms of terrorism. UNODC has been promoting this convention, ICSAN, since its adoption in 2005, and more systematically within the framework of dedicated projects in recent years. In particular, our technical assistance to member states on ICSAN is made possible thanks to 2 major projects funded by the Government of Canada and by the European Union. which provide the framework for UNODC to deliver its services to our member states. The EU-funded project is jointly implemented with our colleagues in New York in the UN Office of Counterterrorism. UNODC delivers a wide range of legal and technical assistance and tailored capacity building to member states. You can find an overview of the services that we can provide in this slide. I will be providing a few highlights of the technical assistance we have provided throughout the years in the next slides. I would also like to mention that we have developed a wide array of resources, and we have made available some of the resources that we have produced to promote this convention in this room. They are available on the desk, on the table at the side of the room, and they are available in all UN official languages. So I invite all of you, before you leave the room, to pass by and take as many copies as you wish in the language of your choice. So just to provide you a few highlights, a few examples of the types of technical assistance that we have provided to promote this convention. We have conducted dozens of workshops at the national, regional, and international level and trained thousands of criminal justice practitioners and policy and decision makers from more than 100 member states. We also delivered a multi-language webinar series on countering CBRN terrorism, which was heavily focused on ICSANT and on its relationship and synergies vis-à-vis other relevant international legal instruments. Both the presentations and the video recordings of these webinars are still available and can be accessed on UNODC's counterterrorism learning platform. We also developed 2 e-learning modules, one on the international legal instruments against CBRN terrorism, which of course include also ICSANT, and most recently a new e-learning module entirely dedicated to this convention. Both these modules are available in all 6 UN official languages as well as in Portuguese. We have a few publications as well on this and other relevant legal instruments, namely a manual analyzes in detail the key provisions of the 7 international legal instruments against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terrorism. And of course, this manual features a chapter which is dedicated to this convention. More recently, we have published a manual of fictional case studies on ICSANT, which focuses in particular on the criminalization provisions of this legal instrument. Last year, we launched a website dedicated to this convention, which is intended to serve as a comprehensive repository of all available resources and information on this convention. So all the resources that I mentioned in my previous slides are also available here and can be accessed on this website. The website is available in all 6 UN official languages and is regularly updated almost on a weekly basis. And of course, on this website, you will also find relevant information on UNODC's work conducted throughout the years to promote the universalization and effective implementation of this convention. Among the wealth of resources available on the website, and just to give you an example, you will also find a section collecting approximately 50 pieces of implementing legislation that have been adopted by states parties to this convention in order to give effect to implement ICSANT's criminalization provisions. So we have collected this legislation, and we keep doing so as we receive information from our member states, because we believe in the importance of sharing information which might provide useful examples and models for other countries, to other states also considering adhering to this legal instrument. We provide also legislative assistance upon request, so we assist our member states to draft or review their national legislation, their national counterterrorism legislation, in order to bring it in line with the key obligations and requirements set forth by ICSANT as well as by other international legal instruments against terrorism. Before, my colleagues mentioned other instruments such as the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendment. And given the synergies and the complementarity existing between ICSANT and these instruments, we also work very closely with our colleagues in the International Atomic Energy Agency. For example, we have jointly developed model legislative provisions to assist states to implement the criminalization provisions set forth by these three instruments. And with the same spirit, we are also in the process of developing a repository of national legislation for implementing the criminalization provisions of these very closely related instruments. As Ambassador Lulashnik mentioned earlier, most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we held a pilot event, a mock trial on ICSANT, which took place in Vienna and gathered 15 participants, 15 practitioners from a number of selected states parties to this convention. So we had judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers gathering and discussing over the course of 3 days a fictional yet realistic scenario related to offenses which fall under ICSANT's scope of application. The key objective of this exercise was to discuss possible challenges that may arise in connection with the investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of cases related to ICSANT. At the end of this presentation, we will be showing you a short video that we have produced on this event and which captures key facts and highlights of this exercise. Our work is not conducted in isolation. In fact, we work in close partnership with a number of other international organizations and also with civil society. And I'm pleased to see many of these organizations represented in this room today. This close partnership is a tangible demonstration of the fact that leveraging each other's expertise and joining forces in the pursuit of a common goal can help maximize efforts, avoid duplication, and fast-track the achievement of results. We were also granted observer status to the Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction, and we are a member of the Emerging Threats and Critical Infrastructure Protection Working Group of the UN Global Counterterrorism Coordination Compact, which deals, among others, also with CBRN issues. UNODC's work has led to concrete and tangible results. We have trained thousands of practitioners, and this way we have helped build and strengthen the capacity of national criminal justice systems. And most notably, we have contributed to significantly increasing the number of states parties to this convention, as this graph shows. Before concluding, I would like to mention that this event builds on a previous event which was held in 2017, and it was co-organized by Canada and UNODC, as Ms. Sobrado mentioned earlier. This event was held to mark the 10-year anniversary since the entry into force of the convention, and it provided the first opportunity to states parties, but also state signatories, to gather, to take stock of the status of adherence to this legal instrument, and to discuss various issues related to its implementation. The key findings of this event are contained in IAEA document Information Circular 924. And I'd like to conclude by quoting an excerpt of this document, which underlines the importance of international cooperation to counter a threat, such as the threat of nuclear terrorism, that transcends national borders, and which emphasizes the key role played by legal frameworks in this regard. So we must continue strengthening these legal frameworks in order to establish strong, robust, and sustainable nuclear security regimes. As a key component of these legal frameworks, universalization of ICSANT remains an important goal. And I believe that this statement remains very much valid still today. Much has been done, much has been accomplished since this event, and in general since ICSANT was adopted and entered into force, but much remains to be done. And we at UNODC remain committed to continue playing an active role to promote both the universalization and the effective implementation of this convention, in close cooperation and in partnership with other relevant organizations and initiatives, and within our respective mandates. Thank you very much, and now I would like to kindly ask my colleagues to play the video on the mock trial that took place in Vienna a couple of weeks ago. Thank you.
Today's pilot mock trial is hopefully the first of many such training exercises. This is the result of our excellent partnership with Canada toward the promotion and universalization and the effective legislative implementation of the International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, or ICSANT.
This is an instrument that we have been working on very diligently for a number of decades to strengthen the nuclear security architecture and indeed to criminalize terrorism with use of nuclear or radiological materials in order to make our world a safer place.
We're also developing the capacity of national justice system professionals to address crimes that fall under ICSANT. With the separate and complementary financial support of Canada and the European Union to promote this convention, hopefully it will lead to stronger implementation of this instrument against nuclear terrorism.
The mock trial has a very realistic scenario, and that makes it quite interesting. In addition, you get a chance to discuss legal issues with colleagues from all over the world. Very interesting and a very good learning experience.
It's a pleasure to be here at the mock trial in Vienna with this pilot project. This has been 3 or 4 years in the making from the Department of Justice Canada, along with other international experts. Participation level has been tremendous, and we hope to see this pilot project being reproduced in the future.
The Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, as well as the amendment to the CPP&M, were, I think, tremendous achievements by the international community to combat the threat of nuclear terrorism. But as with any recently developed legal instruments, one really only knows the strengths and the limitations of them through exercises and coordination and consultation with our colleagues. And as a result, I think the conference and workshop this week, whereby we had a mock trial, was critically important to help all of us as practitioners, whether we're prosecutors like myself or law enforcement agents or forensic experts, to understand how the criminal provisions and other provisions of ICSANT operate in practice. So I was very pleased to be able to participate.
I'm a federal prosecutor in Argentina. I'm grateful to be here. It's very important to know the type of expertise required to investigate and prosecute this kind of crimes involving nuclear and other radioactive material.
I'm a senior prosecutor dealing with terrorism cases, so I'm extremely proud to be part of this project from the very beginning. It shows us as practitioners how important it is to be familiar with the ICSANT. It is important for you, if you are dealing with cases like this, that you at least understand the basic principles from the other systems as well.
We know not all countries have nuclear facilities. All will have radiological sources. We've now ensured that those who can enforce the criminalization provisions of ICSANT have the tools and the knowledge to do so.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Andrian, for this presentation on UNODC's key contribution to the universalization and effective implementation of the ICSANT. We will now hear from various civil society members their perspective and contribution. First, we will hear a video message from Mr. Scott Recker, Vice President of the Nuclear Material Security Program at the Nuclear Threat Initiative, NTI.
On the 15th anniversary of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, the need for governments to support an international rules-based order and legal foundation that reduce the risk of nuclear terrorism is more important than ever. Renewed great power competition, inter- and intrastate conflict, and evolving threats to nuclear facilities raise new questions about the resiliency and strength of international laws and norms. International institutions are under duress. The fact remains that an act of nuclear or radiological terrorism anywhere, perpetuated by a state or non-state actor, would have devastating economic, humanitarian, and political repercussions around the world. Many countries and international institutions have highlighted the urgency of this threat. The most effective strategy to prevent nuclear terrorism is strong and sustainable security for all nuclear and radiological materials and facilities. While every country is responsible for the security of its own nuclear and radioactive materials, threats to these materials require an international response. Moreover, nuclear security implementation must be supported by international institutions and legal instruments that bolster global norms and foster information sharing. ICSANT is a key international nuclear security legal instrument that requires states to criminalize nuclear theft and acts of nuclear terrorism. This includes acts not covered by other international nuclear security agreements, such as the use of radiological dirty bombs. It motivates states to implement more comprehensive laws that criminalize nuclear terrorism and facilitates international legal cooperation when crises occur. There have been meaningful progress in advancing implementation and universalization of the ICSANT since it first entered force in 2007. 120 countries are now party to that treaty, and it's worth noting that more than a dozen of them signed or ratified ICSANT in just the past 5 years. Its significance was also recently reaffirmed at the outcome document at the recent review conference of the amended Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. Yet, there is still more work to be done. 5 countries with weapon-usable nuclear material have not yet ratified the treaty. Many countries that have ratified the convention now face the challenge of implementation. The United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime have provided important support for parties in strengthening their implementation, and NTI has been pleased to partner with UNODC in various fora to promote adherence to the ICSANT. And meetings such as these are important opportunities to reflect on what progress has been made and what work remains to be done. As the risks that we face grow in number and complexity, this treaty remains an essential component of the international nuclear security architecture. Thank you to those who have helped create ICSANT and to those who have been instrumental in implementing and promoting it over the past 15 years, and I wish you all a very productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rickard. We will now hear from Mr. Peter Barcroft, Senior Director, International Peace and Security Program at Parliamentarians for Global Action.
Thank you, Ambassador, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Parliamentarians for Global Action, I am very pleased to have been invited to participate in this 15th anniversary commemorative event to mark the entry into force of ICSANT. Before I start substantively, and for those of you who may be a little bit less familiar with PGA, please allow me just a brief minute or so to provide some background about who we are and what we do. PGA was set up in the late 1970s at the height of the Cold War, very much with a nuclear test ban agenda. Obviously, since that time, the organization has evolved. We have now got 3 different programs, I think 11 different campaigns, but promoting international peace and security, I think it's accurate to say, has remained a core and a central mission of our work. Of particular relevance in the context of ICSANT has been PGA's, not just our programmatic, but our cross-programmatic work over the past 15 years or so, promoting adherence to a range of international treaties. Both international treaties and instruments, including the Biological Weapons Convention, the Arms Trade Treaty, and more recently, for us at least, the UN Security Council Resolution 1540, a resolution that was, I think, mentioned by at least one speaker beforehand. When I speak of PGA, I work for PGA, I'm a member of the Secretariat, but it's our parliamentary members. We're an organization consisting of 1,300 members of parliament in about 140 countries worldwide. It is them who have decided to champion these treaties increasingly and recently ICSANT through great determination and perseverance. They have persuaded, in many instances, they have been successful in persuading their respective governments to become state parties to these treaties, in addition to taking steps to implement Resolution 1540. Resolution 1540, Maria mentioned this resolution earlier, very, very closely related to our work on ICSANT. Let me now turn my attention to that to explain, I think, in particular, how we, PGA, as a parliamentary organization, can make some meaningful contributions. ICSANT, I think it's fair to say, is one of those international treaties in common with several other international treaties, including the BWC, whose importance has not only continued to grow in the ensuing years since its adoption, but I think exponentially grow just in the last few years. I think it was just observed by my colleague from NTI. It's indeed very telling that just in the past 5 years there have been 10 or 12 ratifications. So I think that speaks volumes. The treaty itself, of course, broke new ground in acknowledging the threat of usage of WMD is a threat that, of course, is not only confined to the realm of rogue states. 1540, of course, the genesis of that UN security resolution is the same. It obviously has a more expansive mandate, but the raison d'etre for that resolution is the same as ICSANT is. Even if not a treaty, UNSCR 1540, as we all know, is a binding Chapter 7 UN Security Council resolution, which, and this is a link with ICSANT, among other matters, to use a quaint legal term, inter alia, calls on all UN member states to become state parties to relevant treaties. ICSANT is clearly one of those treaties. As some of you will be aware, just a few weeks ago, Resolution 1540, the mandate of Resolution 1540 was just extended unanimously for a period of 10 years. I think I make mention of that here because it's of particular relevance also for ICSANT. That provision I referenced that calls upon all states to join relevant treaties. I think that's a statement of the continued importance as well of ICSANT, not just Resolution 1540. When we seek to promote Resolution 1540, we are also promoting the universality and implementation of ICSANT. In terms of our ongoing work and future parliamentary advocacy in support of ICSANT, therefore, reminding states, or at least drawing their attention to, it's a recent development of this recent adoption of Resolution UNSCR 2663 is extremely important. I think we also should not forget here, some of you may be aware of this, some of you may not, the central role of parliamentarians in the implementation of legislation, in the enactment of legislation to implement 1540. This is a text that's actually specifically set down in Resolution 2325 of 2016, and really that's where we get our mandate to work in this area, which of course spills over into our work supporting advocacy, encouraging our members to promote universality and implementation of ICSANT. So, just stepping back a little bit, in addition to our work on 1540, where do PGA member parliamentarians fit into all of this? What exactly are we doing right now to contribute to universality and implementation of ICSANT? No harm, I think, to observe here that PGA is both a parliamentary as well as a civil society organization. And this is something, so in many ways, we hybrid before others were, but this is of particular importance because parliamentarians have certain prerogatives at their disposal. Civil society organizations also have certain can bring added value in certain instances as well. As an organization, I think it's fair to say we've been able to fuse those different characteristics, if you will. Again, many of you are aware, in a large number of countries worldwide, national parliaments are constitutionally required to endorse any decision by the executive branch of government to ratify an international treaty before any instrument of ratification or accession can be deposited. We heard recently, or we heard just in the past half hour from the chief of the treaty section what those procedures are. A state doesn't become a state party until it actually deposits those instruments. An extremely important part of the domestic ratification process involves parliamentarians. In some instances, I think it's fair to say this is probably a little more than a formality, but in many cases it's not. So engaging with members of parliament early on, or at the very least keeping them in the loop from an early stage is really imperative. In many countries worldwide, legislators play crucial roles in drafting, enacting, and seeking to mobilize often scarce resources needed to implement international treaties as well. So in addition to promoting legislation, they have these, if you will, appropriation abilities or prerogatives, powers of oversight as well, budgetary authority. We all know very well that when it comes to ratifying a treaty and implementing a treaty, without that budgetary allocation, it's very hard to get to that enforcement stage. Members of Parliament have a key role there too. If there is one area, however, and I think this is perhaps my central message today, where I think parliamentarians have been inadequately deployed to date, it is not in their role as lawmakers, this is well known and well used, but it is in their role as advocates. Parliamentary diplomacy, and I'm just concluding, parliamentary diplomacy is that area where is a largely neglected tool. Within PGA, as an organization, we are now engaging with our members to encourage them in turn to promote ratification and accession to ICSANT. We have launched a new campaign. We are receiving early preliminary indications indicating significant promise and look forward to continuing to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barcroft. Next, we will hear a video message from Mr. Richard Kupik, Senior Fellow and Director of the Stimson Center.
Hello, my name is Richard Kupik, and I am a Senior Fellow at the Henry L. Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., an independent research institution with 3 decades of experience working on nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation. I also direct the International Nuclear Security Forum, which has more than 80 civil society institutional members, as well as more than 200 individual members in more than 20 countries. Funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the forum conducts a range of activities designed to foster nuclear security. My thanks to the UN Office of Drugs and Crime for the invitation to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism coming into force. For nearly 2 decades, through my work on UN Security Council Resolution 1540, I've had the privilege of engaging with UN Office of Drugs and Crime in substantial efforts to universalize and promote implementation of the UN counterterrorism instruments, including this convention, or ICSANT, and it's a privilege to say a word or two on this occasion. There is no doubt in my mind that ICSANT serves as a key legal instrument for shaping national legal frameworks to prevent nuclear terrorism. From my perspective, it's important to also note that UN Security Council Resolution 1540 and ICSANT are at the heart of the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit Action Plan for the United Nations, as implementing ICSANT provisions helps turn the what of 1540 obligations into the how of practical legal steps for nuclear security in at least 3 important ways. First, ICSANT clarifies what constitutes offenses and calls for their criminalization. Second, it more clearly includes nuclear facilities and radioactive materials within the scope of nuclear terrorism. Third, it creates mechanisms for mutual legal assistance and cooperation, and notably excludes the associated crimes under ICSANT from being regarded as political offenses. Let me encourage you to see civil society organizations interested in nuclear security as a complement to the work of state parties, the IAEA and UNODC, in promoting and implementing the Convention, and other aspects of nuclear security. Last year alone, for example, the International Nuclear Security Forum documented 64 nuclear security assistance activities by 18 civil society organizations. Civil society offers added value for efforts to support states and international bodies in implementing the Convention, including a capacity to adapt rapidly to new circumstances, to accept considerable risks in pursuing new ideas and technologies, to carve out safe spaces for freer discussion, and to have the commitment, expertise, and passion for making the world safe from nuclear terrorism. Thank you for your attention and your support for the Convention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kupich, for this presentation. We will now hear from Mr. Noah Mayhew, Research Associate at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. You have the word.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good morning to all of you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. On behalf of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, I would like to add my congratulations to all of you on the 15th anniversary of this landmark convention, which obligates states to prosecute acts of attempted or actual nuclear terrorism by non-state actors, therefore closing a gap in the international legal framework. The added value of civil society organizations like ours in promoting entry into force and adherence to ICSANT and other such instruments, such as the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its 2005 amendment, lies in doing the research to identify the challenges and ways to overcome them, as well as convening the right stakeholders to discuss these very important issues in the sake of progress. As an example of this, in 2021, the VCDNP conducted a study led by Artem Lazarev, who is in this room today, on universalization of the CPPNM and its 2005 amendment. And we also held a high-level workshop to provide a platform to share national experiences in the implementation of the amendment and discuss these updates in advance of the 2022 CPPNM review conference. In addition to the findings and lessons learned, the workshop was instrumental in engaging states who have not yet acceded to the Convention and its amendment, and in the post-workshop follow-up, we were able to put some of these states in touch with the relevant IAEA officials regarding the accession process and assistance that is provided to states by the agency and other bodies. Now, the lessons that we drew from the AACPPNM study are largely applicable to the goal of ICSANT as well, which is why I mentioned this to you this morning. For example, one of the recommendations that came out of this process was, in order to make the process more effective and efficient for states parties, is to implement relevant treaties and accords in parallel, where possible. And in the case of the CPPNM, ICSANT was mentioned many, many times during the implementation of the project. According to the states that we spoke to, adherence to ICSANT helped to strengthen the nuclear security regime of the states generally, but specifically was also crucial for ensuring effective implementation of the amendment to the CPPNM. Despite their difference in scope, the mutually reinforcing nature of these two instruments shown through as a common benefits to states parties, including as a basis for international cooperation, internationally agreed definitions and minimum standards, as well as the denial of safe haven for offenders, which has been mentioned this morning several times. Implementing these two instruments in concert also helps to avoid overlaps in legislation and ensure the efficiency and coherence of the two conventions. So for my last point, I'll zoom out a little bit back to the civil society perspective and just say that we as a non-governmental organization, as non-governmental organizations in general, we are critical to this kind of discourse because our agenda is neutral. We aren't promoting the stance of a particular government or grouping. We are promoting international peace and security through research, dialogue, and capacity building for states. And because of this, we're in a position to have these conversations in safe spaces that are outside of national statements, dedicate time to conduct this impact-driven research that many states parties with your very busy schedules don't have time to do, understandably. And we do this to push for progress that benefits everyone. So with that, I will stop here and once again congratulate the 120 parties to ICSANT and hope that we will see many more in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayhew. That concludes the civil society section of our event. We will now hear from member states on UNODC's technical and legislative assistance related to ICSANT. First, we will hear from Mr. Carlos Ornelas Fonseca da Silva, First Secretary of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Angola to the United Nations in Vienna.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Fonseca,
Ambassador.
you have the word.
Thank you, Ambassador Fassetti. Good morning for everyone. On behalf of the government of Angola, allow me to congratulate Madame Gada Wali, Executive Director of the United Nations Office in Vienna, and UNODC for organizing this high-level event, marking the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, ICSANT. Ladies and gentlemen, nuclear security remains an issue that deserves the attention of the international community. Angola is signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Pelindaba Treaty, the Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement in connection with the NPT, and additional protocol of the Safeguard Agreement, and established the Angolan Atomic Energy Regulatory Authority area in November 2007. In February 2019, Angola hosted the National Workshop on the International Convention for the Suppression of the Act of the Nuclear Terrorism, the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials and its 2005 amendment, organized by the Terrorism Prevention Branch of UNODC and sponsored by Canada, with participation of experts from the AEA, the group of experts of the 54 Committee, Cameroon, and Côte d'Ivoire. The event served to promote the above-mentioned convention in Angola and was followed by high-level bilateral meeting between Angolan entities and UNODC experts. As a result of this effort, in September 2020, during the 64th session General Conference, the AEA, Angola deposited an instrument of accession to the Convention on Nuclear Safety and an instrument of accession to the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, CPPNM, and its amendment, expressing its consent to be bound by treaties that enhance nuclear safety and security throughout the world. Finally, I would like to reaffirm that Angola recognizes the importance of nuclear safety, as well as the harmful effect of the use of nuclear technology for non-peaceful purposes for humanity, which is why the government of Angola is working on joining to ICSANT Convention. We are convinced that this important convention is necessary to further enhance global nuclear safety. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fonseca da Silva, for your intervention. Next, we will hear from Mrs. Gloria Polastri, Counselor of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Ecuador to the United Nations in Vienna. Ms. Polastri, you have the word.
Thank you, Ambassador. A pleasure to see you moderating this high-level event. And a good morning to everyone in this snowy morning in Vienna. I would like to thank to the Terrorist Prevention Program of the Terrorist Prevention Branch of UNODC for the invitation to my country to participate as a panelist on the 15th anniversary of the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, ICSANT, entry into force. In this regard, I would like to point out that Ecuador is committed to the maintenance of international peace and security. As of January 1st, 2023, we will begin our third term as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. On June 9, 2022, Ecuador obtained 190 votes out of a total of 192 in the United Nations General Assembly, which demonstrate international acknowledgement of Ecuadorian unwavering commitment to world peace. Throughout its history, Ecuador has ratified a series of conventions, treaties, and international agreements, including those on radiological and nuclear safety and the fight against terrorism. We are currently taking significant steps toward the ratification of ICSANT. My country signed the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism on September 15, 2005, requesting the initiation of the executive ratification process as provided in Article 418 of the Republic's Constitution, signed by the then Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility. As of today, I'm pleased to share with you that this convention already has the ruling for legislative approval, as well as for favorable ruling of constitutionality, issued by the Constitutional Court as required by our national legislation. Prior to this, the executive branch, through its Ministries of National Defense and of Energy and Non-Renewable Natural Resources, issued the technical analysis criteria for the agreement, recommending its ratification. ICSANT acknowledged the right of all states to develop and use nuclear energy as long as they do so for peaceful purposes and for the legitimate interest of using the vast potential of this type of energy to improve the conditions of each state, which is why the 28 articles of ICSANT are an important tool for the maintenance of peace and the promotion of friendly and good neighbor relations and cooperation among states. Likewise, ICSANT is complementary to other legal instruments against nuclear terrorism, including the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material of 1979 and its 2005 amendment. In addition to the main obligations of criminalization, jurisdiction, extradition, and international cooperation, we also recognize the importance of UNODC assistance with the adherence to and implementation of ICSANT. In this regard, on June 20, 2019, representatives of the Ministries of Interior, Defense, and the Ecuadorian Ministry of Foreign Affairs participated in the regional workshop to promote the universalization and effective implementation of ICSANT, which took place in Panama. Likewise, Ecuador participated in the event on UNODC's contribution to the prevention of nuclear terrorism, which was held in parallel to the International Conference of Nuclear Security, Sustaining and Intensifying Efforts, ICONS 2020. Finally, I would like to highlight the importance of the UNODC project to promote the universalization and efficient implementation of ICSANT, the CPPNM and its amendments, which is financed by the Government of Canada and the European Union. The national efforts of developing countries must be strengthened by efficient international cooperation projects, which will make possible the reduction of gaps in the implementation of our international commitments. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Polastri, for your intervention. Lastly, we will hear from Mr. Michael Penny, Foreign Service Officer from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of St. Kitts and Nevis. And Mr. Penny was coming to Vienna, but due to weather conditions in the connection airport in London, and he's stuck there, but he kindly agreed to intervene live. Mr. Penny, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to put my camera on. I don't know why it is not doing that. But Excellencies, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, fellow panelists, sorry I can only come to you by audio, but good morning from London, and I am delighted, very much delighted to be with you, even though not in person. I feel like a high-priced footballer who can only make it to the quarterfinals and no more. Nevertheless, thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Canada, to the European Union, and to UNODC. Thank you to Gada Wali, and also to Maria Lorenzo Sobrada for inviting me. And I'm from St. Kitts and Nevis, working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I follow issues. And I can tell you several years ago, I was at the press room, right in that building where you are, some years ago, when it was introduced to me, this convention, and I was told that St. Kitts and Nevis is not a party to this convention. And I said, we are. And I went back and checked our records and found out that St. Kitts and Nevis was not a party to. But it's been 2 years since we have become a party to this convention, and is therefore helping with the universalization of the convention. Someone mentioned earlier about nuclear material and not having certain things, but while we may not have all of that, we still, St. Kitts and Nevis, recognize our responsibility in the international community with helping to suppress acts of nuclear terrorism. I come from an area where we sell sun, sea, and sand. And in selling sun, sea, and sand, we may, in many instances, think that nothing can happen, hence the need for us to be aware. I'm glad that we can celebrate this 15th anniversary, and I am also glad not merely celebrating it, because someone may say that we could very well have gone to the 25th without hearing anything at the 15th or at the 10th. But I think that it's important that we celebrate at this point in time, because in reality, we are bringing awareness to the situation. St. Kitts and Nevis, of course, not merely a member, but we are an active member. We are indeed grateful that we have assistance from technical and legislative assistance offered to us by UNODC and from the IAEA, and we take advantage of these opportunities that have been offered to us. We are the smallest nation in the Western Hemisphere, and yet we cannot say that even though we are small, that nothing will ever happen. We recognize our responsibilities in the international community and recognize that the size of the country doesn't matter, because the obligations are what we are very much involved in. We are obligated as a state to be a responsible state, and so we have set out to do exactly that. So we are indeed grateful that we can celebrate this milestone, and we can wish that in the future, those 60 or so countries that are outside of this convention will soon become party to this convention in short order. With those wonderful words, thank you for allowing me to be with you, and thank you for considering St. Kitts and Nevis, and thank you for the European Union, for Canada, UNODC, and all who have come together so that we can celebrate this milestone. And with those short words from London, thank you very much, and I will be here listening and continue to follow. Bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Penny, for your remarks. Now I invite all speakers to join me for a panel discussion. And I would like to pose a question to all of you. What do you see as the way forward in reinforcing the global nuclear security architecture through ICSANT? That is the question. If anybody wants to intervene, yeah, please. Mr. Mayhew, you have the word.
Thank you, Ambassador, and this is an excellent question to end off on today. I would say the first step is really capacity building. It's very easy to sit in Vienna and advocate for the universalization of this very important instrument, But we need to better understand the challenges, and I say we, the collective we, better understand the challenges that states face in bringing instruments like this into force and implementing them. And the better we understand these challenges, the better that we as the global community can help to mitigate them. And we also, I think, need to be able to better explain why it is that it is in the interests of these states to conclude such instruments. We can go with the argument that the stronger individual nuclear security measures are in a country, the stronger we are globally and the safer we are, and that's true. But that can be a tough sell for countries that have little to no nuclear infrastructure, little to no regulatory infrastructure, and quite significant development needs that understandably are prioritized above nuclear security. We need to work better on the what's in it for us arguments, I think.
Thank you very much. Any other intervention? Mrs. Kempanen, you have the word.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this opportunity, and congratulations to UNODC for organizing this very impressive anniversary event. I would like to echo the previous speaker. I think really capacity building. This is the main objective, and I would like to also invite all other donors, in addition to Canada and United States, to consider contributing to this very useful UNODC projects. I think what is also important that this capacity building is 360-degree, covering, of course, all provisions of the convention, but also different phases from the screening of legislation, but also up to the end of reporting. And I know UNODC has, a couple of years ago, encouraged all parties to report how they have been implementing, for example, the provisions on criminalization. And I think this is also an objective that we should reiterate, this encouragement to all parties to report on the implementation. And the very second point I'd like to still make is the importance of coordinated efforts. This means at the national level to have a good focal point that is coordinating the efforts of competent national authorities. At the regional level to organize seminars and awareness-raising events, but also concrete opportunities for international cooperation on those provisions that require international cooperation on mutual legal assistance or extradition or other areas. And I think countries in the same region often have similar experiences and backgrounds that would facilitate such exchanges. And then finally, at the international level, to look for further synergies, as you have already been doing, between other relevant instruments like ACPPNM and UN Security Council Resolution 1540 to make sure that we have the best synergies of all the international cooperation efforts. Thank you so much, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much. I failed to introduce you. I apologize for this. Mrs. Anne Kempanen, she is a representative delegate from the European Union in Vienna. Thank you. Any other intervention? Yes, please. Representative from Ecuador.
Thank you, Ambassador. Reinforcing the global nuclear security architecture is undoubtedly one of the most crucial and urgent challenges of our time. As the Director General of the agency said it in his remarks at the beginning of this event, we must bear in mind that the unthinkable consequences of threats to nuclear security would know no boundaries. In that regard, we completely agree with the predecessors speakers, and also we think that we need to be more proactive. We need to work in closely monitoring and also generate synergies to enhance the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNY, and its link to the CTBTO by promoting its universalization. Taking as a precedent the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, known as the Tlatelolco Treaty, instrument that established the prohibition of nuclear weapons in our region, and undoubtedly Tlatelolco is one of the milestones in these common efforts. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Any other intervention? Ambassador?
Thanks very much. I'll just very briefly say, I think it's easy to be complacent. We are talking about legal provisions, and we're talking about nuclear and radiological, which is sometimes not the daily lives of lawyers and prosecutors and judges. But the simple fact is our world is considerably more complex than it has been, and that nuclear and radioactive materials are throughout our world more and more. They're being transported, which is when they're least secure, and it presents some considerable challenges for us. And one really important issue that resonated during our mock trial was to handle the evidence. When you deal with radioactive materials, it's, how you have to go in and secure it, how you take that material and all along that chain until you get to the prosecution or extradition or whatever your legal process is. So it is much, much more complex than just the provisions of the actual treaty. And what I would hope that we can do in the intervening period until we're celebrating the next anniversary is that myriad, that full scope effort on ICSANT to increase the number of signatures, ratifications, national legislation, capacity building and training to teach what those provisions mean and to raise awareness of the complexity and importance that we collectively need to work on to make ICSANT a reality that is a powerful tool in our nuclear security architecture. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lulashnik, for your remarks. And Mrs. Lorenzo Sobrado.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Facchetti. Just in line with what some of the other speakers were saying, we at UNODC are convinced that universalization is still of the essence. As Ambassador Lulashnik mentioned, we cannot be complacent. There are more than 60 countries that are not yet party to the instrument, but in parallel, we are working with the assisting states in implementing effective legislation, because this convention is not self-executory in national legislation. One has to really transpose it, especially in terms of criminalization. And with regard to capacity building that was mentioned by the European Union, this is something we are really focusing on for the upcoming years and at several levels. The mock trial was one such example, and we plan to continue to train in innovative ways judges, prosecutors, through developing of materials. We did a manual on fictional cases, but we would like to now do other manuals focusing not only on criminalization, but other issues such as jurisdiction, extradition, and other needs of the criminal justice system. We are also convinced of the importance of training the operational part, the frontline officers, and we will be partnering with our container control program colleagues, also to work on detection, and the mention to the evidence and how it is handled. It's also very important, something that we saw at the mock trial, and we hope to continue to cooperate and enhance our cooperation with the IAEA, with Interpol and other relevant actors in issues like nuclear forensics to train our counterparts in the member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lorenzo Sobrado, for your remarks. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Peter Barcroft.
Thank you, Ambassador. I can be very brief, and just to echo the views that have already been expressed, ICSANT is at a crossroads. It's been adopted in 2005, entered into force 15 years ago. As many have remarked, there's 120 states parties, but has also been observed almost a third of UN member states are still not party to this vital international treaty. There is a role here for civil society. We've a number of representatives from civil society here at the panel, but also those spoke in terms of marshalling decision makers, policy makers, to take that step to make those decisions. And certainly within my own organization, PGA, we look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Masoud Karimi Pool, Chief of the Terrorism Prevention Branch of UNODC, for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for braving the snowstorm that's out there today to come and join us in person. That means even more today than it would have yesterday. And of course, you've come to join us in observing and celebrating the 15th anniversary of ICSANT. In this regard, I'd like to thank Canada and the European Union for supporting this event in particular, but also our broader program of support to member states on the adoption and implementation of ICSANT. I'd like to thank Ambassador Troy Lulashnik and Ms. Anne Kempainen of the EU delegation for joining us in person. I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Facchetti, for your excellent moderation of today's event, and also thank the other high-level speakers who couldn't join us in person but delivered statements by video, Undersecretary General Wali, Undersecretary General Voronkov, and DG Grossi, and the EU Special Envoy Van Deelen. I'd like to thank the Office of Counterterrorism, IAEA, and Office of Legal Affairs, and other key partners that we work with within our respective mandates on the prevention of nuclear terrorism. These joint efforts of the organization, different international organizations, are very important and have multiplying and synergistic effects. Of course, I'm also grateful for our CBRN team in the UNODC Terrorism Prevention Branch, whose tireless efforts have made this event possible. Maria, who heads the program, Francesca, Artyom, and Martin. Excellencies, the fact remains that terrorism continues to seek nuclear materials, looks to evolve in developing new threats, and combined with the fact that nuclear or radioactive materials do go missing. And this is, of course, a cause for serious concern. And just not long ago, the international community couldn't imagine that jet planes could be hijacked and rammed into buildings and kill thousands of people, yet here we are. Just a few years ago, it was unimaginable terrorist organizations could seek and retain actual territory and run de facto governments, and yet here we are. A few years ago, no one could imagine that the Islamic State could actually be operating deep into the heart of Africa, yet here we are. And so the threat continues to evolve. The challenge for us in the international community is to work together to anticipate some of these threats. And I think ICSANT is an instrument that very timely offers a framework for international cooperation to prevent acts of nuclear terrorism. And so with the 120 states parties, that's a great start, but we're not nearly done yet. And as Ambassador Lulashnik identified, there are millions of items that need to be controlled that are in the global flow these days. And ICSANT again operates to give member states the tools and the capacity they need to prevent nuclear terrorism. And UNODC is here to help. Over the last 15 years, we've been offering numerous benefits to states parties, including enhanced international cooperation, common definitions and minimum standards, and denial of safe haven for offenders, to name a few. I'd like to thank representatives of Angola, Ecuador, and St. Kitts and Nevis for sharing their respective experiences with the convention and cooperation with UNODC. And thanks also to the representatives of civil society for their always important views and contributions. I'd like to thank the participants in today's meeting, but also to close on what I think would be an appropriate note, which is that ICSANT is not an exclusive club. On the contrary, ICSANT welcomes every single state to join and contribute to a truly global protection against malicious acts involving nuclear or radioactive materials with no safe havens for their perpetrators. And we in UNODC stand ready to provide you with any assistance in this regard. So let me conclude by thanking you for your participation, especially because of the snowstorm today, and to invite you to join us for a reception outside to take some sustenance and hot coffee before you head back out into the snow. Thank you.
One final remark. Some delegations are asking the floor. The format of this event doesn't foresee intervention from the floor, so thank you very much for your comprehension. And let's go to the reception now. Thank you again.